Good day and welcome to the Strong Ambition Podcast. I'm your host, Rhyland. I'm here to dive into what makes people ambitious and live a more ambitious life. And this one, I'm going to be doing another solo one because I always like to do these every once in a while to give you a bit more of what I've been learning based on my experience and basically research or just really my own trials and tribulations of training and fitness. So this is a really good one because I had a pretty good evolution in terms of in good and bad ways. Like, not saying that everything's gone well is actually what I like about it, is I've learned a lot in the last few months here, really in the last six, because one of the solo podcasts I did last summer was, want to be bodybuilder. And I started to really stop practicing that. Right. And actually I did go back to it. And that's part of the story I'm going to have here, but trying to go after lifestyle more because my clients and individuals like yourself are lifestyle people. So using bodybuilding practices can really help you as much. So I'm going to go over kind of from the fall what I evolved into. I'm going to talk about how the new year kicked off, how things are going well, and things that didn't go well. And even more interestingly, how I prepped for my photo shoot that I rushed and how I yo-yoed from it. And then we'll also talk about binge eating, and we're going to talk about my love affair with weed and my future transitions and what I've learned from this evolution. So let's start back in the fall. In the fall is when I was really like, I need to actually recognize my maintenance calories. This is something that I really appreciate now, understanding metabolism, understanding, the poor behaviors that go into bulk and cutting is just a macro cycle of yo-yo dieting. But if it's a part of a sport, it makes sense within our own natural inclinations. Some guys might do this more routinely. I don't think girls as often will use the term bulk, but that's essentially people not like the dirty bulk, people not caring and saying, well, at least I'm gaining muscle, when really it's you're just not being accountable because your shirt's probably not coming off in the winter. But I wanted to prevent that a little bit. I wanted to keep everything reeled in. And in the fall, it was actually working really well and cool, where I was doing 30-minute workouts 4 or 5 days a week. And I was sustaining and even improving my body comp, what I could tell from the scale. I did that for a while, and then eventually did get to a point where what I call an environmental bulk, where I'm trying to eat maintenance calories, but I know when I go to environmental things, I'm probably going to be in a surplus, not intentionally, not dirty, but I guess in some sense, not perfectly clean either. But I did that kind of inherently, partially on purpose, because, and this isn't necessarily a good thing, knowing that I was getting ready for a mindset of a cut in January. So it was actually kind of dangerous because it did lead me to a couple binges. But the good thing was that I was doing what I think everyone should do if they think they're in an environmental bulk or a psychological bulk, is what you could even call it. Basically, in a phase where you're not in the mental capacity to handle being in a deficit or to track and to put all the effort in there, that's fine. But then have the benefit of having high volume and really pushing the weights. And that's exactly what I did. So I feel like I did gain some good size. I felt like I did see essentially bulk. Bulk would be kind of bigger muscle, looks a little bit soft, but it's big because you actually are filling it up quite well. And then it's hard when you start losing the body fat. And then you actually don't feel as big, but a part of that is just the fat itself. So anyway, so I go into that kind of environmental bulk in December, and again, I feel like I was gaining size. I was getting more weight than I probably even should have, but I was trying to keep it reeled in. I felt like, especially from my intentional bulk the year prior, I was less body fat percentage than that. But the funny thing is, when you're not trying to be in a deficit, you don't see it. You really don't want to see it. You'll see some of it. You'll be like, yeah, I don't really like the way my body looks and all this stuff, but how much is really there? And this is just for me mentally, I'll say, is that for me, when my body fat gets a certain percentage, I will find that I'm just not comfortable. But it's in a certain range right before I get to that body fat percentage. I'm like, yeah, at least my shoulders, my chests are big. And so it's proportionate. but really I'm also even kind of holding in my stomach. I've done that since I was a kid, just always kind of keeping the abs a little taut so you feel a little leaner, and you don't really see what's there. You don't want to. You find the right lighting, you find the right angle, you get a good pump, and you're like, yeah, I'm still lean enough. And so it's a bit of a, perception that you want to have. And then Jan 1st or whatever, you start your actual fat loss phase, you're like, oh my God, I'm so fat. And it's not really that drastic, but you start to see what was there because you don't want it to be there. So that's a bit of an interesting shift that you should be aware of. If you're currently not in a fat loss phase, you might not see what's there. And when you get into one, just prepare to know that you're going to see something that you don't want to see, and it was always there. And it's okay that it's there. I'm not saying that, I'm just saying these are normal behaviors that you have to get used to seeing. So beginning of Jan, I had done this, basically gotten all my clients together in on this. So it was good for me for accountability too, but for them as well, to have, we meet weekly, every Tuesday, talk about our challenges. Some people are still even trying to do more of a mass gaining phase, but we all have our challenges. So I was aiming for, my maintenance calories were around 2,700. I was now aiming for around 2,000 calories. And, I noticed how easy it was at the start. And this is something to really be aware of as well. The first 3 days, 2 to 3 days, will actually be surprisingly not that bad. You're not going to feel as hungry. You're going to feel like you normally are used to eating more, but you're actually not going to feel like hungry. And if you're in a deficit, you should feel like modestly, lightly hungry. You feel like I could eat, but I'm okay. If you feel like, oh my God, I'm so hungry, that's probably not enough calories. And I mean, this is why I think you should track, because if you have too few calories, you're going to do a yo-yo throughout the week. If you have too many calories, you could be wasting your time thinking you're in a deficit, and you're not really in a deficit. So both of them are going to be bad scenarios. So what happens there when you're starting off, other than just the psychological cue of being used to being a bit more fuller and stuff like that, actually feeling hungry won't really probably happen. And I think it's likely due to muscle glycogen stores. So you have sugar stores of glucose in your muscle glycogen, and in your liver. And if they're pretty stocked up, probably from being in, either a surplus or maintenance, even from one weekend, you can feel pretty good. And so going in for a few days, you're like, yeah, this isn't bad. And you do a workout or two, and you just live your life for a few days. And then it's like, okay, this got a lot tougher. And that's normal. Just know that that's a normal thing. So what I would do is what people call them refeeds. I call it the ebbs and flow model, because life has ebbs and flows. It has some days that are going to be higher calorie days and lower calorie days. And even when I was doing my maintenance, that's kind of one of the things I recognized in the fall is like, even if I try to do a few 2 or 3 deficit days in the week, that actually is what makes it a maintenance, because I'm likely going to go over my calories in the weekend. That's actually life. So as much as we say you got to be consistent, it's like, well, when we talk about lifestyle is not consistent. So it's basically being able to control the ebbs and flows that's going to make you more effective long term as well. So let's say you have a great body composition, you're where you want to be. Even trying to maintain that, you're going to probably want to do an ebbs and flow model on certain weeks where, maybe it's the summer, and on the weekend, you're going to go camping and you don't want to track all the macros, and you want to have a good sense of it. Well, I would spend 2 to 3 days in a deficit to make it so that you have a calorie balance, ideally. And that's just something I noticed. So just to understand that the ebbs and flows are extremely helpful. And on a deficit, it's extremely helpful to consider doing one maintenance calorie day, or refeed day is what some people call it. I prefer call it maintenance calorie, because even maybe a bit below it, but a higher calorie day during the week, because the weekend you still have one of those days there, but it can spiral quicker when you have 2 days. Now everyone's different. Some people like 5 solid days of a deficit based on routine, and they're working and everything's good, and then they rest of the weekend and they refeed. And there's even an argument for that being possibly better for your metabolism. But the main thing I would say is just make sure that you track on your maintenance day, on your refeed day, And something I even recognized, and I'll explain where I learned this recently, is be on the lower end of where you think your maintenance are, just so that you can be a little bit more certain. Because if you're in a deficit perpetually, 5 out of 7 days of the week, you've done that for a few weeks, your metabolic rate is probably even lower than what's predicted, right? And if you have a hard time losing body fat, your metabolism in general is just on average probably lower. So the main thing there is I was doing about 5 days in a deficit at about 2,000 calories, and then it was getting success, and I was like, you know what, I want to leverage it up and do another day because that could be an additional day of calorie burning. Because anytime you do a maintenance day, you would be you're doing your metabolic rate justice. I think it's a psychological practice of actually having enough calories that's really important, but you're not doing any work for your deficit, right? So that's actually not, it doesn't feel like you're moving forward towards your goal. You are in the big picture, but that's why I tell people 1 to 2 days, because some people want to do one, some people want to do two. I'm actually going to go probably back to doing two with a slightly more aggressive deficit, but I'll explain how I arrived at that later. The other thing is just consistency of calorie burning. So I work out 5 days a week, what I would call intense workouts, whether it's doing lower upper body, like a strength day, or even a high intensity conditioning day. Those are intense things because they beat up your muscles. They are systemically challenging because your body has to recover. Now, that doesn't mean you burn a ton of calories. I don't burn a ton of calories in those workouts. The high intensity interval you can, but for the most part, that's not why I'm doing that for my conditioning, just to be closer to athletic and heart health. The strength training itself does not burn a ton of calories, unless you're just constantly doing stuff, and you're probably getting more of a aerobic workout out of it than you are, really a strength workout. When you're in a deficit, what you would probably want to do is not focus on volume. You want to focus on the intensity, the appropriate intensity, not max intensity, to maintain, maybe, or realistically work towards strength goals. You can still get stronger in a good deficit. The reason why bodybuilders don't try to get stronger is because they don't inherently need to. They need to probably have that high of a stimulus in hypertrophy to sustain what they've been used to. And the systemic load of doing heavy weights isn't very good on people who are, really suboptimal calories. So I'm doing, just the right amount of volume. I'm doing 10K steps a day. And then I started to switch even just to one maintenance day. And it was all going pretty good. And then I even, when I get into these, I want to say sticking points where it's like, it doesn't seem as good. Like, okay, well, maybe I increase my output. And I think that was kind of a mistake, but it actually worked well because I was watching my sister's dog, and I just had to take her for walks. I noticed it right away in my physique that just walking a dog 3 times a day for 20, 30 minutes, sometimes 40 minutes. And it's actually being colder out does make you burn a few more calories, was enough. And it also could have just been that week that all of a sudden I saw it. That doesn't mean that it was an exact science. I actually got to make sure you recognize that. Some weeks, some days you wake up, you're like, hey, I'm having a skinny day. And that's just what it is on weight loss, right? You're going to have some good days and bad days. But the week after was really interesting. So the week after I got back from my sister's, I then found out I had bed bugs in my apartment. And that was, quite an impact. And I also had my business coach tell me I had to do all this extra work. Plus, I was now looking at what was going to be close to a possible photo shoot. So I had a lot of stress in my life all of a sudden. The photo shoot, I wanted to line up with a photographer who's actually moving, and he was one of my favorite photographers I had. So I was like, I don't feel ready for this. And then the bed bug thing, and there's a ton of work that goes into bed bugs. If you haven't had them, you basically got to move everything 2 foot or so off the wall, clear out your closets, and put everything in bags. And yeah, it's not fun. And getting that response was just like, okay. Now I try to always handle stressful situations as good as I can in like an optimistic way. Basically, I try to say that I'm a duck on a pond. I'm not sure if you ever heard this analogy, but if you watch a duck or a bird on the pond, they just look like they're floating. They look like a piece of wood, but really underneath they're kicking like crazy, and they're just really good at keeping calm. And that's what I try. But underneath, there's shit going down. So during this week, I also had another thing that happened that was interesting. And it was that I mixed some sesame seed oil and a little bit of sugar in my ground beef. Now, the reason I'm pointing this out is because I don't know what stirred up my appetite and just made it feel like the food I was eating was insufficient. It could have been really the stress. It could have been the sesame seed oil and sugar in my ground beef, but I had never felt less satiated from the exact same food that I was supposed to be eating. I'm like, that doesn't look like the right amount of food. That doesn't feel right. Like I was constantly hungry. And that week I felt like I didn't lose anything. Like I felt like I almost went backwards, which didn't make any sense. I felt great the week before. I don't even know if I might have had one maintenance calorie day on the weekend, but couldn't believe how poor it went because I still tried to keep my output, tried to keep my 10K steps up, tried to keep my 10,000 calorie deficit. Now, one of the more honest things when I went into this next phase, which was a deficit sprint, was spoonfuls matter. You know, when you're having one or two spoonfuls and maybe the extra sugar, maybe the extra oils and stuff, when these things can matter in certain settings, right? So maybe that was a part of it. Again, even stress itself has been really interesting to learn a bit more about. I don't think we know exactly what it does, but there is a trigger response that when you have a high cortisol response from emotional stressors, there's a bit of more of a probability that you could be burning fewer calories, and somehow it affects your metabolism. Now, I'm literally trying to research this stuff right now. I'm trying to understand it because the only thing I've ever heard from metabolic adaptation is being evolved in NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And so does the stress of mentally white knuckling yourself, even though I'm sitting here calm, like, okay, I'm okay, is underneath actually exhausting me mentally? And so I don't literally, you might not fidget as much. And fidgeting is a part of NEAT. Like any little movement outside of exercise is NEAT. So when I'd heard the one thing that they notice when they actually try to track what metabolic adaptation is in some people, it could be within NEAT. And when I look back at my bodybuilding days, that's really how I felt. My training, actually, I would get warm enough to do the work. I couldn't go heavy. I didn't feel like going heavy, but it's all the lifestyle stuff. I would have a client come to do hand pads. I actually coach them mainly how to hit the bag and how to shadow box, and I do maybe 15 minutes of hand pad work, which I know wasn't morally right, but just low energy, and your body's going to try to conserve it. I heard one guy saying that when he was in a deficit for bodybuilding, he would blink slower. So what is the stress doing? I don't know. And again, you got to look at all factors. Maybe I was just in a deficit for so many weeks. I had done a maintenance week and I should have done a diet break. And then maybe, it was a cortisol, maybe it was the food. But in any case, I had 2 weeks and I had a photo shoot, and I really didn't want to pull a shoot on it. I'd worked with this photographer before, did great, but I've also pulled shoot on him before and backed out of it. And, a bit of an ego thing where I'm like, I really don't want to be the back out guy. And, I'll even say, like, very openly from boxing, there was many fights I got offered from bigger fighters. And I think due to concussions I'd had in the past, I didn't accept them. And I didn't like that part of my personality because I don't like the idea of backing down. So 2 week sprint is what I kind of put on myself. I said, what could I do for 2 weeks? Could I go into the bodybuilding calories, do some, high cardio, and can I get this done? And I really am pretty low on photos that I want to use for social media. So this is really essentially for my business a little bit. So I did it. I tried the 2 week sprint, and I wanted to actually see what those calories felt like again, because I'd heard an interesting guy online that I really do respect and admire a lot of his stuff. He had said how he does like 1,200 calorie diets for almost like a month. And he said it didn't affect his metabolism and all this stuff. Now, I think there's going to be individual differences. And this is honestly how I've always felt about bodybuilding, that I feel like a lot of bodybuilders, not all, can come, if they come from an ectomorph, meaning a skinnier body type, your tendencies around appetite could likely be different than endomorphs. I feel like endomorphs, bigger body types, tend to have bigger appetites, and you tend to see them in powerlifting. And they also have the archetype, like their physique tends to be just, lower to the ground, thicker people. Bodybuilders are like that too. But again, if you look at old Arnold, he was a skinny guy. I see a lot of body people come from skinny and get really, really big. So my whole point of that is, when I listen to this guy talk about how 1,200 calorie diets and he's in the bodybuilding, I'm like, your overall system just probably different than mine. But I will say, as a caveat, I look at all angles here. I normally do a fair bit of cardio when I do these, and I did do a cardio cut with this. So the bodybuilding style basically took me down to about 1,600 calories a day, and I'm tracking almost absolutely everything I can. 95% of what I could. I was even tracking my my vegetables, and that this was actually probably one of the best lessons in there. It's like, wow, the peas and carrots actually have quite a bit. Maybe the oils that I'm putting in some of the things actually affect it. The only thing that I would say, if you're trying to be low calories, to not track would be like leafy greens. You would have to have so much leafy greens in order to add any calories. But that was very honest, and that was a good lesson for me because of that. As I had mentioned, when my appetite got spiked, those extra spoonfuls, I thought it was only like 50 calories. Maybe I was having closer to 100 calories by the time I finished 2 or 3 spoonfuls. You do that each meal. Oh, well, that's 600 calories. And again, maybe my metabolic system wasn't where I thought it was. So you got to consider it when you're trying to be accurate with your deficit. Now, the other thing was, so I'm doing about 30 to 40 minutes. I wanted basically, like, when I look at my Fitbit, I think it is a great tool for determining your consistency. Like my whole plan in January and February, for the most part, was just basically have a 3,000 calorie output day based on my Fitbit for the most part. And if it's more than that, awesome. Doesn't have to be. And so that even means, like, if I say have just walking around to do, because I'm doing a boxing class, it's actually great because I'll get in 10K steps, but I'll for sure just, know I'll be that active. And it's not because I believe that my calorie output is exactly 3,000. I just know that I'm similar to what I did yesterday, the day before. And that's the way I think people should read their Apple Watches or whatever. Not that it's exact. It's just know that it's your consistency that you're getting into, because on a day that you take off, you might still get 10K steps. But if you didn't do strength training that day and you get 10K steps, you're probably burning fewer calories. So I would do, personally, I just I want the consistency. I'll probably do 12K steps, maybe 13, or at least recognize it's not as many calories as the day I did on strength training. So it's just more about the consistency model than anything. So when I was doing the bodybuilding style cut, I wanted more than the 3,000. I wanted closer to 3,200, maybe even upwards to 3,500 output. But as long as it was around 12K steps or over 3,200 output, I was pretty happy. And most of the time it was closer to 3,500. But let's really put that to scale, because there's no way that this number is 100% correct. That if you try to track all this is why I'm saying that the metabolic estimations are estimations. And if you already feel like you have a, quote, slow metabolism, then 1,600 calories as an output or intake and 3,500 calorie output, like, doing the math on that, you're almost looking at nearly a 2,000 calorie deficit per day. Nearly. That means I should be losing a pound of fat every couple of days. And that's just not what happened. There's no way that's what happened. I did lose a lot of body fat within a couple of weeks. I'm not arguing that, but there's no way that's what happened, because then I should have been shredded. I should have lost like 10 pounds in 2 weeks. And that's just an important thing to recognize, that when you're looking at all these metrics, they're all estimations. You want to use it for a consistency model. And I say test and check. So that's actually what I'm going to be doing here in the future, is really, I'm going to try to narrow down where is my probable output or probable calorie deficit. Like what is it actually doing? So I'll talk about that in the future or at the end here. But anyway, so getting into this, it sucks though. It's very important. 1,600 calories without any refeeds for 12 days. It does suck. And again, doing some steady state cardio, I'm not actually going really fast, but in a zone where it's like, you're walking on an incline is a really good system, low impact, but it still does beat you up mentally and just like trying to always be outputting and never really refeeding your carbs. I was actually having a low carb, low fat. So it's like 60% roughly protein. So this is like a bit of protein leveraging system that you see some bodybuilders use. I know I've heard of carnivore bodybuilders just basically, and that's what I ended up doing. I was actually fairly carnivore the last week. I just didn't need to track the veggies because then it was mainly just meat, which if you have excess protein, right? So let's say I only needed 200 grams of protein. I have 250. Well, that 50 grams of protein is actually going to act probably more closely like a carbohydrate, like a real slow carbohydrate, because it's a very slow and challenging process to break that down. And then the excess would be stored as muscle glycogen. But that's not inherently bad. Now, you could just have carbs and it'd be a little bit quicker, but I do still feel like that food is a bit more satiating for me. And that's just my experience, that I would rather have 250 grams of protein, a little bit more meat serving than like a little side cup of rice or something. Just when I'm in those really lower calories, that's what I feel. But this is, again, I want you to really appreciate everything I'm describing is in context of a bodybuilding style prep. This is not something someone should practice. I'm really going to come to how this was all a bad idea. But I learned from it. So I get into the water cutting, and I even got diuretics, because you're doing carb depleting. I'm doing higher reps. I always drink a lot of fluids, but I was drinking them like excessively on purpose, and not just straight water, but like essential amino acids, even like a lot of salt. I did my bodybuilding a few years ago, and I was actually told not to have a lot of salt, but I intentionally had salt because I was, it's the one thing that still gives you a little bit of cognitive energy. And when you go to have diuretics, they're going to drain you of that, right? So that was actually probably one of the things that really just lit a switch on me that this was so stupid. So I get, the other thing too is doing a carb load. So carb deplete for about 10 days. The last 2 days, I start putting carbs back in, but, just thinking of this more methodically or analytically from a nutritional science perspective. Okay, I want to refeed my carbs. I want to have 4 or 5 meals a day, spread my meals out throughout the day. And it was actually really challenging, because going from low calories for several days and then being like, okay, let's have some more food. No, just a little bit more, so I'll use the example, climb a rope and then go down it slow to come back down. Like, that's really hard. So I'm going to talk about all that when I kind of discuss, reverse dieting and stuff like that as well. But the thing that was really stupid about that was adding carbs in that I don't normally eat. Like, I was, bodybuilders use rice cakes. I'll use rice cakes. Well, probably shouldn't have gotten the chocolate flavored kind, because then that made that hard not to eat. And I normally don't eat that many meals in a day. So why was I doing this? This was stupid. And so going into the whole thing, this was what really hit me, right? I was doing a water cut, doing the carb load, and I was overthinking absolutely every single step. I almost contemplated doing protein sparing modified fast, which is basically starving yourself of calories and just having enough protein for your body weight. And, looking back at all this, man, these are all the wrong psychological things that I would never tell a client to do. And I even said that I wanted to do my aim to see if I could find my 1 rep max on sumo deadlift during the shoot, because at least that's a sweet photo, because I didn't know how it was going to look, if I was going to be happy with it and all this stuff. But if I could at least do that 1 rep max, I would be content. And then I was like, well, why are you dehydrating for it? That's not going to make you better for your 1 rep max. And that was the last moment where I'm like, I was questioning so much of this. I didn't do the protein sparing modified fast also because I knew that was going too far into the far end of the spectrum. But yeah, it was just very unhealthy behaviors, getting into this idea of the bodybuilding, heavy aesthetics, not lifestyle. And that's why I'm not trying to do bodybuilding. So I don't know why I was doing this stuff. I mean, I know I was doing it for the shoot, but I just appreciate after hindsight, right? So I finally, like the day of, I started slamming electrolytes because the dehydration was not feeling right. It was not a good thing to do. I cognitively, like I could feel more of a headache come on. I was so used to having good salt throughout the day and water. It's like, hey, if I can't do my job, this is a problem. And that's even the reason why someone should always reserve when they have like a bodybuilding style deficit of like low calories, high cardio. You have a job to do. You're not competing for anything. I know you are competing with yourself. Absolutely. I'm not arguing that. You're trying to improve yourself. Absolutely. But this is not a sustainable lifestyle. And that's why I've always been about the 10K steps, not about cardio. I've been about activity, not cardio. It might look like cardio to some people from how I do it, but as soon as it gets nice out, I'm going to be going outside. And that's not going to look like cardio. It kind of is, but it's not going to look like cardio. And some days I do just do cardio, but it's because I want to be an active person. So I'm going on some tangents here. Just bear with me. Now, the shoot went well. I felt way better at it, and because that was like my kind of epiphany moment where I was like, stop doing things that you don't normally do. And so I just stopped overthinking and I started eating the foods I'm used to. I did everything that I was used to halfway through that day on Saturday. It was a real like aha moment for me. And then the shoot went well. Like I actually did my heaviest sumo I'd ever done. I did 565 for a single. So you see that on social media. I'll post that here shortly. And I was happy with my aesthetics. You know, I want to be leaner. But it's actually kind of a cool checkpoint, if you will, milestone. And you know, I'm just overall happy how it went. We got a lot of different shots and it was fun. But you know, and so that's why I had this emotional like look back at it. Like, was it a mistake? There was mistakes made. Should I have done the shoot? Maybe not, but like I don't really inherently regret it because I learned a lot from it. Now I have photos, but I wouldn't encourage anyone to do that. And I'll at the end, I'm really going to talk about how rushing anything or fast tracking your diet or anything like this is a bad idea. And I'll explain exactly why right now, because of the yo-yo, you know, because I was doing nothing I wanted to continue to do, right? I didn't want to continue 1,600 calories. I didn't want to continue that much cardio. I don't mind doing some aerobic work in the morning at night. I actually do like that because I'm just so sedentary with my job. So I like having some more reasons to get on my feet. But that amount was too much. I was like, my feet were starting to get sore, joint issues and stuff like that. And yeah, and you just become obsessive over food. So when I was in my 2,000 calorie diet, it really didn't feel nearly as hard, right? So a lot of things there. Now, the night of the shoot, I didn't really binge. We had a treat. Me and my girl, I had a beer, nothing crazy. And that's actually something I really try to do is even just still have a drink here and there. During that deficit, I actually had a few drinks, not on all in one night, just different occasions, and I would track it. So I did really try to include lifestyle in that. And it was actually great. Like, just choose whether or not you want to have a beer after hockey. It's carbs. It's not the best form of carbs. And some days I didn't. Some days I had an apple instead. But if that beer meant something to me emotionally, I would have it. If a glass of wine with my family meant something, I would have it. But I would try to keep those margins to more really having some value to them. So I had a beer after. And again, I think I was probably in a bit of a surplus, you know, that day, but I don't think crazy. Now, the Sunday, and this is why it was easier for me not to really go off the deep end or anything, but the Sunday was interesting because me and my girl were getting a massage, then we were going to dinner, and then I was chilling by myself when she went to do schoolwork. So I went for a massage with her, and I was like, you know what? I haven't had my weed day. So I am allowed, and this is my own challenge for myself in the new year, is 12 weed events, like where I smoke or have an edible, basically one per month if I want. Just because I have an unfortunate relationship with weed. I'm going to talk about that after this, because what did end up happening was exactly what shouldn't have happened. It was ironic because when I had it before massage, which is why I like, there's purposes for weed in my life that I enjoy it so much. I think I'm more introspective. I think I look at things with a bit more of a colorful mind, and it makes me zone into my thoughts. And when I'm in a massage, I just zone into that. Oh, that release and that feeling and relaxation is so meaningful. But then the problem is binging. And so everything was fine. We had dinner, and certainly I splurged on dinner. I actually had pasta first time in a while, and it was delicious. And nothing was really inherently wrong with dinner if I would have left it there. But she left me to myself and the TV, and I was baked at this point. And that's where I just binged. So this is a really important lesson for everyone to recognize. The most difficult time is not climbing the rope. It's when you think you're done climbing to hold on. Again, like, just imagine that you're not worried about the physical capacity to climb a rope, but think of the stress that it has on any person that's capable of climbing a rope. Let's just get that out of the way, because maybe you're not good at pull-ups. I don't want you to think of that stress as much. But climbing up is way easier mentally than holding on or climbing down, because holding on feels like you're making no progress, you're not doing anything, and climbing down, that gravity is going to cause a bit more rug burn on those hands, right? And that's really what you're going to feel after that. I went into the highest point of accountability and got baked at the lowest point of accountability, where I was at the severe solid deficit that I could do to no fucks given. And that is yo-yo dieting. That's exactly what it is. And I should have recognized that problem with that behavior. So it was a very important thing. But, this also gives me a depiction on how I'm going to prepare for my next photo shoot. My goal for my next photo shoot is actually going to be TBD, to be determined. And it's going to be at the end of week 2 of a 4-week cycle, because everything I did in that prep was something I would not normally do, except for like the training. The training was pretty routine. But the cardio, I don't normally do. The low calories, the carb cycling, the dehydration, none of that stuff I believe. And I can look great with a pump with salts. Like, I don't need to do that. And so if I can just do a nice photo shoot, and hey, this is just who I am halfway through my month, then that is not only is that way more realistic for, all of the people who see my material and everything like that, but it's just because then I don't, falter from that, because that's my big point of accountability. But what if it isn't? What if it isn't the biggest point? It's just a part of it, right? It's just, just a photo as you're in the middle of a long run, right? And so instead of it being the photo at the end of the finish line, it's a photo, halfway through. And so that's something I appreciated for accountability. When you look at your own accountability, this is what I hope to kind of teach you on. Don't look at just the end date. Look at the lifestyle after. Okay. So say it's a wedding, say it's a vacation, say anything like that. Your hardest stress is not up to that point. You're going to think it is, but it is the next 2 weeks after. And I even used to say, it's a week after, but it's actually real. Even put it 2 weeks after. And what I would even encourage someone to do is to maintain a deficit. Now, if you're going into, you either maintain a deficit after, like, let's say it's a single event, like a wedding or something like that, be prepared to maintain near a deficit, maybe between maintenance and deficit calories. This is reverse dieting. So instead of, I did 1,600, the next week I should have done 18 to 2,000, and then eased into about 2,500 to 2,700. Now, this was the really interesting thing I wanted to also explain to you. What happened to me was that because this, metabolic system affected me so much. I mean, even my knuckles just all of a sudden got so dry from low fat, low calories, bleeding. Like, it was, I only get that from like low calories. And The week after, I'm like, okay, I'll do maintenance calories. My calorie maintenance should be around 2,700. I don't really need to do any walking because, that should be what where my metabolic rate is. And this was kind of an experiment for me, to be honest. I was like, let's see if maintenance calories work. Now, I did have a binge day on the Sunday. I'm not arguing that, but I did maintenance calories. I did 2,700 calories for the week after. Maybe 1 or 2 days after that were, and the next weekend they were a little bit higher, but for the most part, I was accountable. And I gained more than just a pound of fat. So again, this is the fascinating thing about metabolism, that we just don't know that much about it, but you got to try to hedge your bets. And I just call it hedging your bets because the probability is just like, you probably don't know, and you want to be as close to knowing as you can. So when like I explained to you the 1,600 calorie diet and then 3,500 calorie output, again, that is near 2,000 calories a day, near 2,000 calories. I should have lost a pound per day. And then if I was at maintenance calories the week after, I shouldn't have gained more than a pound, maybe that one day. Because remember, 3,600 calories is about a pound of fat. And so that one day, maybe I was at a calorie surplus of 1,000 pounds, or sorry, of 3,600 calories, which is ridiculous, right? But maybe my metabolic rate was just that bad. But even then, pounds of fat, and I could see it. I could visually see it. Like, I feel like I'm even back to where I was near January. So it's almost like a month lost within a week, not binging that week. I just want you to bear in mind, I have yo-yo before, but this was the most accountable I had been to tracking after doing a cut. And I was just like, wow, that was quick. So it makes me appreciate the importance of reverse dieting, the importance of continuing everything I was doing. It's so bad to do a deload week after a point of accountability like that. Like, I really like to almost time my vacations with some sort of training that I want to have volume. I like to time things, and bear in mind, I love training. So me working out on a vacation is not a taxing thing. It's a part of my identity, right? So when you look at those events, there's two ways to do it. You either continue a form of accountability during it, which, on vacation, you're probably not going to want to, or you come out of it beforehand so that you have a better metabolic system. Now, how much is the challenge? And I think what I've recognized now is you can't just right up to where your predicted maintenance calories is, because if you have a hard time sustaining your body weight, you think you're closer to the endomorph, you think you have a slow metabolism, then you actually just need to underestimate what your calorie prediction is. You're probably overestimating your maintenance calories. And that's what I've definitely recognized this last week, especially coming out of a deficit. So let's say you've been doing this diet for a while, for weeks and weeks or months, and you're like, okay, I got this event. Give yourself at least 3 days before that event to eat maintenance calories so you don't feel starved at it. And say it's a vacation. Again, at least 3, maybe even 5 days where you're like just under where your predicted maintenance calories is, so that it actually, you're probably refeeding, you're probably going to restore your muscle glycogen, and then just that craving instinct of splurging isn't going to be there, because physiologically and psychologically, you're more at rest at the event, right? And versus if you go on vacation and you've been cutting and you've been doing all this stuff, and then it's like, all right, I'm on vacation, you're gonna have nothing but the most intense case of the fuckets, and that's just not what you don't want, right? So that's the main thing I really hope that I can, encourage you all to consider when you're looking at your own evolution, is how to avoid the fuckets, how to avoid the yo-yo, how to maintain your results is a really, really hard thing to do. I've constantly struggled with it my whole life. But I learned a lot from this, the importance of reverse dieting and the importance of creating accountability past the point of my photo shoots. My photo shoots have been the main events I prepare for, but just that the deficit's not over just because the event's done, right? That's even a great mindset to have if you can sustain that. So what I also wanted to talk about here was really just the binge and the weed. So really they kind of go hand in hand for me, but I'll first talk about binge eating itself. So binge eating, because I can do it without weed. There's no doubt that it's just the person that I am that has this emotional attachment to food. And I actually learned so much from Alicia Casanata, and she, you know, even before I was working with her and talking with her about a lot of stuff, I already started to ask myself the question why. And I think if you're in any way a binge eater, this is a very important concept for you, that when you binge, you're definitely going to have emotions. You're definitely going to be frustrated. You're definitely going to be mad. You're gonna be disappointed. All those things, emotions you can't refute. Like emotions are always going to be what's there after something has happened, just in general, good, bad, sad, angry, anything. These emotions are actually just signals for you to recognize that something's happened, but you still need to look into the problem. And so what I mean by that is I binged on the Sunday, and then on the Monday, it's like, okay, that happened. Why? And so in the previous years, like probably 10 years or so of binge eating, and most of the time, very similar cycle. Have an accountability point, don't have accountability, and then I'm just gonna smoke weed and eat food at night because it was a fun thing to do. Like, how is that not fun? I'm smoking weed, I'm having hyper palatable food and watching TV. That's 3 levels of drug induced, or basically, I kind of consider food and even TV has a drug like reaction to you. So that's 3 levels of just being completely dopamine just rushed, right? So it's just a very dangerous habit, but that's where I would go. And then I'd be like, oh man, why does this keep happening to me? But not really ask the true why. Is like, what are the emotional things that I'm doing? Why am I seeking this out? What am I trying to do? And it was really interesting. One of the first times I'd actually asked myself the why, because I remember being at my parents, and all of a sudden I'm having, like, I'm not kidding you, like spoonfuls of chocolate chips. And I was like, okay, why? I know you're baked. I know you're hungry, but what are you looking for? And just to be in the middle of a binge and to ask myself why was actually extremely eye-opening. And I looked at all my emotions. I looked at what did led up to this moment. When I'm at my parents, sometimes I'm a bit more of the little fat kid that really loves food. When I'm there, I know where all their treats are, and I normally don't have those treats. And then I even ask myself, well, maybe I just didn't have a real good treat in a while. I haven't had this type of food in a while, and I really felt like it. So, there was just something there, something to take in. And then I also say, for anyone who's trying to comprehend their binges and trying to improve them, if you can just slightly put on the brakes, you've made improvement. Like, consider, like, let's say you would eat an extra 4,000 calories. And for those who don't binge, appreciate that is actually not unrealistic. I see an extra 4,000 calories. That is not unrealistic at all. The thing that really ends up happening is that when you're doing these extra, when you're binge eating, you go until it hurts, because it feels so good to eat food. It has to really hurt your stomach in order for you to stop. And that's just the way that the binges kind of work, especially when you're baked, because you can't feel your stomach very much. And so if you can go from 4,000 calories to 3,500, you just made an improvement. And that's actually really important, because if you always get into the fuck, it's the fuck, oh man, no, fuck it, no, fuck it. It's like, hey, you might be in a binge, but can you do a little bit better of one? And maybe the big binge turns into a smaller binge, and the smaller binge turns into a splurge, and the splurge turns into treats. That's not a bad evolution either. And when you're looking at, when you do this, like, this is why I'm saying you got to be mindful and ask yourself why when things are happening, way more often in life, but for sure with binging, you need to, because I always try to talk about emotional cues, and cues are very helpful to recognize that it's a reflex. So if you think about why athletes are really good at what they do on the field, is because they're reading physical cues by their opponents, and then they're anticipating where they should be. And a goalie catches a slap shot with his glove, he's reading all of the body language ahead of time. He can't see the puck that fast. He can kind of see it but he has to have his body set up in order to catch it. And so, a football player is going to tackle someone. He has to anticipate, is he going to juke? Where's his hips? All these things, right? And that's a positive way of anticipating cues. The cues for you is like, what are your emotional cues? What are the environmental cues that could put you into it? For me, it's going to my parents. For me, it's being around certain foods. And actually, I've started to recognize certain foods I just don't want on my diet anymore because I cannot control myself. Like I had peanut M&Ms the other day. And I was like, wow, yeah, I just can't. They're not satisfying enough for me to stop. And I don't want to eat food that doesn't satisfy me. And that's just another evolution that's really taken on my character. And so when you're looking at your binges and what were the behaviors before, what were the emotional cues, commonly people will find that it's like stress that leads it to them. And I would say most of my binges weren't really stress. If anything, it was that I had just little accountability and I wanted to enjoy it. That's all it really was. And weed. And so this leads me to my next point, which is the love of the drug of weed. Weed's been a part of my life since I was probably early 20s. I think I was 19 or 20 when I started smoking. I didn't smoke it at all in high school. But it was, it was my mental escape, it was a way to relax. And I'm a very introspective person. So it makes me introspective. And that's actually the one benefit that I didn't want to let go of. There's no arguing that sitting down, eating food until it hurts your stomach is not something I need in my life. But smoking weed and, getting introspective, and there's almost like this lighthearted, I say almost cartoonish voice that comes into my head. Everything's funnier. Everything's just a little bit nicer in terms of how I don't take anything too serious. So it relaxes me a lot. And I go into really interesting thought patterns. Like I really analyze things because I find weed is so analytical. It makes you only think about one or two things at a time, which I think is really cool. But then when you think about just food and watching TV, that's all you can do. You're just on autopilot, just this dopamine rush, right? So that's where it's a negative. Now, I said I'm doing the 12 uses within a year, and I had to just recognize, even I had already said this at the start of the year, that was my goal. But then I even recognized more that I have to really reel in the binge instinct. So this is another little thing that this, again, I'm on my own journey. This is why I'm being very open. This is like a public journal for you all, that I need to control the binge habit if I'm going to have this drug in my life. So I said I'm only allowed, and this is kind of a funny thing you wouldn't believe, I'm only allowed to binge and smoke weed 4 times in a year. And I've already done 2. So I don't have many left, which is like a good thing because it forces me into a different use of it. It forces me into, okay, if I smoke weed, I have to be uncomfortable because I'm actually going to feel an appetite. I'm actually going to feel like I want to do these things. And this kind of leads me back to the binge eating habit of just, or any bad habit you have, that when you're thinking about wanting to do something, it's just a thought pattern. It's a pattern of thinking. It is not who you have to be long term. I always say our mind runs like rivers, and it really does, because when, neurological patterns fire together, they wire together. That's how you learn to talk. That's how you learn to sit. That's how we learn. Literally, the way that you learn how to do strength training is by doing those repetitions, so that the body says, oh, this is a better way to do the squat. This is a better way to do a push or a pull. And so if you can start to rewire your patterns, you can do that. Now, Adele Spragon had a wonderful way to put this. You have to identify the thought pattern as being a bad pattern. You first have to identify it as, like, it doesn't have to be who you are. You have to identify it as not being what you have to be. Now, I did just get a book. I haven't read it yet, but I am really excited to read it because I really believe in this. I think it makes sense. And this is a lot of what NLP is about. Neuro-linguistic programming. What language you use with yourself is super important. Like, we can communicate with our subconscious mind way more than you believe. Simple concept was when I started to develop a habit of always cleaning my dishes. I don't have a dishwasher here, and I would just use the language. I'm not a person that's okay with this anymore. And then I also looked at all the benefits of, it's not that hard to wash the dishes, and I always feel better in the morning when everything's clean. And so I started to just always say that this is who I am, this is who I am. And any day that I don't do that, it irks me now. And it never used to. It never used to at all. And now it's a part of my identity. And using that language was very potent for me. Even just, I'm someone who makes my bed. I'm someone who likes whole foods. And starting to use these language, I'm someone who goes for walks. And if I don't do it, that pattern isn't fulfilled. And these are positive patterns. It bothers me. But if I say I'm a binge eater and this is just what I do when I smoke weed, then that's a bad pattern. And that's bad language. So one of the reasons why I even want to say too, why I'm saying 4 binges and not 0, why I'm saying 12 smokes and not 0, is because I'm trying to evolve. I think when we try to go, cold turkey, in some way that can work for some, but I think it's a low percentage. And, I'm trying to find the right amount. And even if like those binges, as I say, can turn into splurges when I smoke weed, I'm good with that, because again, it's still something I enjoy. And if it gets so bad that it does affect who I'm trying to be as an identity, then it does have to leave my life. Just like anything that you want to evolve your character into, you have to start to recognize what that long-term character doesn't do anymore. And ideally, I'm a person, say 5 years from now, in a physique that they want, in a body fat they want, strength, size, mobility, all these things, but still gets to enjoy weed and controls himself much more adequately, does not feel the need to smoke weed excessively, does not feel the need to, probably even feels the need to eat. Here's a very important thing. I feel the need to eat, or the want, the drive to eat, but I can sustain my my mindset within it. And that's something that I've practiced on over the last few years that have been, revolutionary from 10 years prior, where I just didn't know I could. And so things can evolve. And that's what I'm trying to do with a lot of this stuff. And I'm hoping that as you're listening to this story, it doesn't bore you, and it gives you some mindset to think about your own. Think about what you need accountability on, what you need to evolve, and use metrics if you can. You know, I uh, I've done different, challenges, but I think what's really effective, instead of abstinence from everything, is quantify appropriate behavior. And so for drinking, I'm doing the same thing. 12 what I would call binge drinking events within a year, and I can use them at any point. I could use it once a month, or I could use it, maybe a bit more dense in the summer, but then that would require me to take months off. I can have one drink at any point, and that's not a binge. And one drink might consist of multiple ounces, but that's not the point. The point is, I just don't need the second, third, and fourth, because that's where they're just unnecessary. If it's about the drink and enjoying the drink and the atmosphere, have the one. But anytime I want to have more than that, I have to track it. And just in terms of on the annual basis. And it's already starting to recognize, oh, I got this event, this event. Okay, some of these events I'm going to have to sacrifice to some degree. And that's okay. And that's kind of the person I do want to be. I want to be the person that looks at the big picture and doesn't blame the events for coming up and saying, I got so many events I got to drink at. It's like, no, you don't. You got events that you want to drink at. You got to, and you actually are in charge of all of your actions and behaviors. Have one drink at them. See if you still enjoy yourself. And that's something I'm evolving to be in. And again, I love to continue to come back to the term evolution, because if you talked to me when I was 20, when I was first getting into this fitness stuff, I still remember one of the first guys kind of mentoring me a little bit in this. He was like, yeah, you don't always need to drink on the weekend. You have like a 12 or 6-pack instead of having a 12. I'm like, why would you do that? But I was 19, 20 years old, if it wasn't a 12-pack, it wasn't worth it, right? But now I really hate hangovers, and I really don't need that in my life unless it's like a social occasion. That's something special. And maybe I'll even get down to 6 in a year. But anyways, I digress. I'm hoping that this does give you some real tangible lessons. That was a lot of what I wanted to do with this. I wanted to convey how I'm learning in this process. The idea of the bodybuilding cut. The bodybuilding cut was really a poor practice for lifestyle and longevity. I did it for the shoot, right? And most people don't need to do that. I would say almost no one does. And I wouldn't do it again. I really wouldn't. I'm hoping I get enough photos, and the next shoot, I do it in the middle of my training cycle. So what I did learn though, this was very valuable, was that how much I can track better, because in that 1600 calories, and actually sustaining 1600 calories isn't bad for a few days. So what my plan is to go a little lower than the 2000. I'm going to go closer to 1800. I'm going to do my ebbs and flow model 2 to 5 days a week, or 2 days a week. Maintenance probably going to be closer to 2500 based on what I just seen last week, that my maintenance calories is not 2700. Maybe some weeks I do maintenance calories, or sorry, I will do maintenance calories. Maybe I bring the maintenance calories up, but my hope is to do 3 deficit weeks and 1 maintenance. And this is, I got this from Lane Norton, and they're called diet breaks. But don't think that a maintenance week, and this is something that I'm personally appreciating, I think you should still track on it for a while. Now, if you get really good at your diet and you're like, I don't know, I know my food, then good for you. I still need to get to know my food, because I'm still not there. Because even though that week I had what should have been maintenance calories, I was hungry still, and I gained weight. So that tells you a lot about what happens to the metabolism when you go through deficits. So 3 deficit weeks, 1 maintenance calorie week, and the maintenance calorie week would always try to land on my 3rd week of a program. So the 3rd week of a program is more intense and high volume. You have more of an advantage and possibly a little bit more muscle retention. You feel better for your lifts, better recovery. And then week 4, you go back in your deficit, and that's a deload week. So that's my plan. And I'm going to check every 3 weeks to see, like, or really every month, and see, okay, how is this responding? If I'm doing this many calorie deficit days and this many calorie maintenance days, and this is where I'm predicting everything is at, how is that rate? And is it going to get me there slow and steady? And I have to be okay with that slow and steady, because that's what I encourage my clients to do. Because what I do now, I'm going to do later. I have to. And I even mentioned at the start, the ebbs and flows is life. Like, even when you get into a maintenance and you're saying, hey, I want to have a maintenance life, like, I'm super happy with the physique. Well, what if it's summer? You can't tell me that you're very guaranteed to have maintenance calories every single weekend. Hey, and if you are that person, then you're probably not going to learn that much from me. But if you want to enjoy certain outings, barbecues, whatever it is, you might need to use the ebbs and flows to even get a maintenance. You might need to have probably like Tuesday, or even Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then ease out of it, because remember, we don't want to be starving by the weekend. Thursday maintenance, Friday maintenance, and then enjoy your weekend. We're just basically using some ebbs and flows, because you're going to have higher output days, lower output days. You're going to have high calorie events. And so therefore you still have to be, I think you should be okay with some, medium calorie days. And then one last thing I'm going to say is, on being able to sustain this, is you got to start to know the foods that are high risk for you. And this was actually a real eye-opening moment for me. I want to address. I always walk by this vending machine that's outside of the gym in my apartment. And you can just imagine, as I mentioned, all these binges that I do, imagine how many times I've been to that vending machine baked. And this is on like the 2nd floor. I'm definitely taking the elevator back in the day. And you don't just get 1 chocolate bar every time you make that trip. You get at least 2 or 3. And I would make more than 1 trip a night. So that was old me. And now new me walks by. And it was really interesting to look at the peanut M&Ms, because those turned into like one of my favorite candies in the last 5 years. And I just like looked through it in a different way. Because now when I look at food, I look at what's the taste, what's the experience, what's the digestion, and what's the satisfaction, and that last part. And so this is where, like, I always say, it's protein, energy, fats or carbs, micronutrients, and enjoyment. But my enjoyment has to be satiety, because of who I am with my appetite. With my appetite, it's basically, actually, the way I look at it is protein, micronutrients, and satiety. If you understand that, what I'm saying is, if I get energy, an energy source, a carb or a fat, and if it has satiety in it, I want it. But like the M&Ms, I looked through it, I was like, you know what? You're not tempting to me anymore. Not the same way, because I know you're not going to fill me. I know I'm always going to crave more. Now, I did have peanut M&Ms last weekend. So I'm not saying that it's like I'm never going to have these things, but cookies are the same way. A lot of these foods, I just started to recognize I don't need you in my life anymore because you're probably not going to help me get towards the person that I want to be. And I recognize that with a lot of foods. I used to like muffins. I don't like muffins anymore because I'm like, you're not that good to me. Like to me, it's steak, sweet potatoes, cooked veggies. Like those are my favorite meals now. The closest thing to like a dessert style thing that I really enjoy that actually does satiate me is like quick oats, my protein powder, that's chocolate peanut butter, putting some banana and frozen berries in it. Delicious. And it fills me pretty good. And not as good as like the steak and stuff, but it still does fill me good. And so if I can get satisfaction from my meals, that matters so much more. And I really recommend you think about that. If you have a hard time sustaining your calories, think about satisfaction. And then what I would say is someone trying to gain body weight and size, if you're on a gaining and you have a hard time with appetite, you just inverse that. You say palatability, you say protein, micronutrients, palatability. So you want hyper palatable. You still need your protein, you still need micronutrients. Those are still the two things that you're going to need. But your energy sources should just be hyper palatable so that you actually do spike your appetite a lot more. So those are kind of my two different models that I recognize or I recommend people look at. So I hope that this rant was effective. I actually, the second time doing it, I tried to stay a bit more on topic. I tried to be a bit more clear with my message and really to convey the lessons that I have had in the last 6 months for all of you, because I am on this evolution of character of sustainability. And I think there's a lot to everyone to learn. And I want people to appreciate that it's not easy. Anyone who shows you that, yeah, you can lose weight and keep it off. And I even show people that you can. For me, and I probably, if I didn't rush this photo shoot, I would have been on my way to really practice a lot of what I've learned in the last year. So it was a cool experiment to recognize what happens when I do these things. It's also very important for me to recognize that I'm not a bodybuilder right now. If I do that in a couple of years, then all those practices can come in and I'll have a coach that'll help me through it. But it is not something that anyone should try to incorporate into the routines. There are certain information and strategies that come from bodybuilders that are wonderful. Hypertrophy, they're geniuses. How you can optimize the nutrition super efficiently, they're genius. Like bodybuilders are super smart. But the actual prep practice is not something that you have to take. You probably take maybe 20%. Well, it's really just have more calories than them and don't do the cardio, but you don't have to do everything that they do. And whatever you're doing, you got to keep doing or better, So as I just mentioned, I'm looking at what parts of my personalities, my old personality, I can let shed away, why I'm evolving my weed, how to evolve my binge eating, how to evolve my food preferences, the things that I'm okay with leaning into, the things that I don't even want to start, because once I start eating, I might want to eat more of them. And those little character changes is something that you're going to want to look at. You're going to want to look at, does this food actually provide enough for me as far as enjoyment that I need to have it in my life without a high risk of affecting the person that I want to be long term? And that's right there. That is such a valuable lesson that I've constantly been trying to work towards. And with your binge eating, start to ask yourself why during it. I'm not sure if you ever watched the movie Twister, but in the movie Twister, where they're talking about tornadoes, there's this moment where they get, spoiler alert, they get this machine in there that has all these bulbs fly in it and give all the information about the tornado because they get to see inside the actual storm. That's what it feels like to actually ask yourself why in the middle of a binge. Instead of just being immersed in food and just emotional in the food and just, I'm just going to eat and watch TV, ask yourself why. Turn off the TV for a bit and then just be with the food if that's what it's about. And then just ask yourself why. And you actually find if you don't just go and sit in front of the TV and do it, or what's led to it, you might even slow down a lot quicker because you're going to be more mindful in that moment, not on autopilot, and just recognize that it's a pattern. You don't have to be the pattern your whole life. So I hope this helped. I wanted to convey what I've been through in the last 6 months, and I hope everyone learns a little bit and to recognize that even trainers struggle. and I'm gonna figure this out, and I hope I can take a lot of you along for the ride as well, because you have to enjoy the process. You have to learn from the process, and that's why it's not just getting to a place. Even when I get to a better body composition, which is such a hard thing to know what that's going to be, I think it's really important that I enjoy everything that I'm doing in the midst of it, and I wouldn't stop. Right. And so that of course leads me to my last point, that we know it's not about the pursuit of happiness. It's about the happiness within the pursuit. I'll see you next time.